You're still with us on Breakfast Extra this Saturday morning. Now, conflict in the Middle East has rarely stayed within the borders of the region. When tensions rise there, the ripple effects are often left or felt across the global economy. And for Africa, those shocks can be particularly severe. Now, the growing confrontation involving the United States, Israel, and Iran have already raised concerns about global energy markets, shipping routes, and the international trade. Now, for many African economies that depend heavily on imported fuel and global supply chains, disruptions in the Middle East could quickly translate into higher prices, inflation, as well as economic uncertainty.
Nigeria is not immune to this. Despite being an oil producer, the country still relies heavily on imported refined products and is deeply connected to global trade routes that could be affected if tensions escalate any further. So to help us understand the legal and geopolitical dimensions of this unfolding crisis and what it could mean for Africa's economy stability, we are joined by Magonga Magonga, legal practitioner, and also Adeniyi Kunnu, International Public Affairs Analyst. Gentlemen, you are welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here. Magonga, it's the first time I'll be meeting you. Interesting name there. So nice you had to be named twice. But let's start with you this morning. From a geopolitical standpoint, how significant is the escalation between the U.S., Israel, and Iran for the rest of the world before we come to Africa?
That this escalation is a watershed moment, because it has unleashed a cascade of interconnected crises, economic, geopolitical, and strategic. They're impacting on everybody's daily life. You know, like, for example, with the closing up of the Strait of Hormuz, which actually traffics almost 20% of the freight, be it petroleum, fertilizer, I mean, generally food. The kind of situation that has been triggered by the closing of that strait has overspilling effect to the entire African continent, because, like, which actually is supposed to be a very, very serious moment for us, that shows that we need to start being self-reliant, because the repercussions that is going to have just by the strait itself is phenomenal, to say the least. And this conflict, by its own nature, is going to affect very many African countries. Because you see, for example, oil, we do not even dictate the prices of oil. That's why, like, when I see like what Dangote was trying to do in Nigeria, I'm very, very proud. But if this thing was replicated holistically in Africa, we would be placed very well. But right now, we don't dictate the prices of oil. And right now, because there's a war there, it's going to affect us big time. Coupled by the issue of the millions of Africans that are working in the Middle East region. They can't even find their way back here. The money that is supposed to be repatriated back to Africa, to their families and everything, that is going to be a very, very big blot in our financial capability as individual homes. Okay. That's just a brief overview.
Oh, Magonga, thank you very much. Mr. Kunnu, let's come to you. Let's talk about the whole trade network and where Africa lies here. It's not just oil, like Magonga just noted. There's also food. There are things that we actually trade with these nations. But particularly Nigeria now, when it comes to oil, there's a certain belief. People thought that this would create an opportunity for Nigeria, but it doesn't seem to be doing so, because at the end of the day, we do import refined oil. How does this show the lack in our systems? What does this expose for Nigeria or Africa in general?
Well, I think that there's a lesson being learned from this global disruption in terms of how energy sources are sourced and distributed, as well as talking about other forms of commodities. And the lesson is that we have to ensure we evolve systems and strategies of being self-dependent as far as we are concerned. If we looked at what has happened, expectedly, one would have thought that at the point of disruption, the country should pass on. But the people of this country, just about 48 hours ago, we've seen Dangote refineries and some other bodies complaining and having a brick bat over the fact that Dangote, although got the crude at certain amount of money, and that certain amount of money is what the crude is sold for right now, but that Dangote refinery has increased it. That in itself is a reflection of how poorly we're prepared for global disruptions to be able to leverage it. At this point, the problems we're having is not the same problem a country like Angola, a country like, I believe, Egypt, a country like Algeria seem to be having, because their systems are well structured to be able to leverage the problem of supply of crude along the respective areas that has been talked about. So the huge lesson that I believe we have learned from this, but it seems as if we have not actually learned that lesson. Because if we looked at when we had the Iraq War and many major wars within the past 25 years, Nigeria has not benefited in any way. I have to say that for the record, because if indeed we've been able to put things right in terms of refineries functioning, and we do not continue to have people siphon money in the name of turnaround maintenance of refineries and promise all of the emptiness when we're talking about modular refineries, this is the moment for Nigeria to make more money. In the absence of being able to rise above the shadows of the 4 refineries that actually came to us since the beginning of the nation called Nigeria, this would have been our time. Then at the same time, I'm wondering how it has become such a thing, because if we're talking about this problem of not taking advantage of the global disruption in the supply of energy, one would not just look at other countries alone, because we are supposed to be the country that sets the pace. Since 1958, when they told us that Oloibiri has afforded the black gold, but for many we do not know, the crude in the Niger Delta was also used to engage during the Second World War. That's a conversation for another day. But they believe that the nation was at its earliest, and that's the reason they did that. So that's a conversation for another day. So I'm simply saying right now that the lesson learned is that following this, it's time for us to hold those responsible accountable. For instance, we're talking about Nigeria that doesn't have an oil or a petroleum minister for the past 12 years. President Muhammadu Buhari sat there and did not choose an expert in that industry to manage it. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu now is doubling as the Minister of Petroleum Resources for Nigeria. These are people who do not have any idea about global best practices and modus operandi in the oil industry. And they are the people sitting there using their ego to kill the industry and not understanding how to speak to the issues. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is the Minister of Petroleum Resources because he has not appointed one, and he has not been able to make any statement that reflects an inkling of professionalism and understanding of the dynamics of crude oil business in the country. The same thing with his predecessor. So how then do we expect a country, and by extension a continent, to benefit from all of the goodies that come with such disruptions? So to me, it's ridiculous, and I think it's time for us to send a citizens' bill that prevents or precludes these people from bringing their ego onto the stage where people are supposed to be employed to do what they're supposed to do. Check across the continent of the world. Every president has a substantive minister of petroleum resources. What is wrong with us here? So we are the only country right now, even on the African continent, that doesn't have somebody who is in charge of the petroleum ministry. Go check Angola, go check Algeria, go check Morocco, go check these countries. Nigeria is the only one. So I think, to me, we have to review all of these shenanigans that make us laughing stock, unknown to us. And even if we know, we have lost the ability to be ashamed of what is not right. And that is why we are not cashing home at this point. And that is why even internally, Dangote is fighting with the respective petroleum industry bodies, because there's no spokesperson to give direction. And the person who is claiming to be the minister doesn't have an idea of how to handle it. That's how I want to open here in this conversation, please.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kunnu. Thank you. Magonga, let's come back to you. We are seeing countries change alliance.
Just one thing.
Go ahead.
Chime in from what Kunnu has just said.
Go ahead.
It is very, very profound. But according to me, I think in Africa, one of the problems we have is systemic. And we have a certain kind of culture that does not encourage a local entrepreneurship, progress. I don't know why I call it an artificial construct. You see, like, for example, what Dangote is trying to do. That is a very novel idea. It's a very good thing, because if I can import oil from Africa instead of getting it from the Middle East or Venezuela, the way I think Kenyan government gets it from. If we can support somebody like Dangote, put the structures in place, make sure we are refining our own Brent crude, we are doing all these things locally, and it's an African thing. We need a more I don't know how I can put it. We need an Africanization program that is going to empower the Africans within us. I can import my fuel from Nigeria, but Nigeria, the kind of corruption that is there, that as Kunnu has just put it, that you don't even have a substantive minister who takes care of the ministry. I mean, if you don't have structures in place, how do you expect everything to be streamlined? It is about time that we looked inside ourselves and looked at how we can progress ourselves. It's not all the time we're going to talk about neo-colonialism and all this kind of rubbish.
A safe, sustaining Africa.
Yeah, Magonga, especially because you just said that now, I'm curious to find out, because I agree 100% with both the stances that you both have. Now, in terms of the implementation, when we're looking at the systemic failures that we have in Africa, how do we implement these things? What are the easy steps that we need to put in play in order for us to at least do the bare minimum?
I'm telling you, that is one topic that is close to my heart. But if we decide to talk about that particular topic, we would go on with this topic about the US and whatever. Because the African problem is very, very deep. It's ingrained. It's systematic. We need a complete shift from how we make policies, our electoral processes. It's a political problem. The kind of avarice, the kind of greed that is among us, I know it's crazy. Even in Kenya, we have a president who doesn't give a whatever about his people. I mean, it's so selfish. I would think because the laws are there. In fact, if you ask me, in Kenya, we have over-legislated. I think the same would apply in Nigeria. It's not like the laws are not there. It's the implementation where the problem is. If we put this implementation in place and we put repercussions for mistakes that you do against the people. Because, for example, in our constitution, the constitution of Kenya, Article 1 says, we, the people, the sovereign. The impression that is created is like these politicians, which I think is like, we have governors here, we have governors in Nigeria. They feel like they're demigods. And yet they're supposed to be our employees. We are the bosses. But that kind of mindset has to trickle down. And it has to come from, it has to start like now going down from the education system. I don't think there's a country in Africa that has ingrained topics like patriotism and constitutional dispensation and principles from a tender age. When you come up, you know, stealing is wrong. You can't get a president who's like 45, 50 years and you're telling him not to steal. That is like telling somebody, I mean, the guy, it's already second nature. We need to change the system. I see how Kunnu was a bit upset there.
All right.
Because he feels so helpless.
Magonga, thank you very much for that. Kunnu, the world is changing. One war is changing ties, alliances, networks, economic or political. Everything seems to be changing now, and people are making adjustments to who their alliances are. Now, in Africa, we are seeing where situations where, well, certain relationships are being formed. And I'm wondering when Nigeria should actually pitch its tent that would aid it economically to perhaps take advantage of the situation here, noting that it's an oil producing country. Is our relationship with America one to be suspicious about, for instance?
Well, I need to first of all say this. And I need you to remember this for as long as God gives you life, that we gravitate towards our source. The reason many African countries gravitate towards the West and now the East, epitomized by China, is because these respective regions have become the sources of our sustenance, whereas the opposite is actually the case. Up until Sudan, and South Sudan parted ways, and South Sudan was created in 2011. China was in charge of 40% of the oil exploration in Sudan. And as I speak, China has been able to have access to very large portions of Sudanese land, the same thing they have done in some part of Nigeria, displacing people in places like Kano, like Agbara, Ogun State, to be able to farm food, eventually get involved in agriculture, start supplying the same thing they use our land to grow to us, and to now become the controllers of the corporate destinies of Nigerians and Africans on the African continent. And that is why it's a criminal thing for anybody who is educated not to participate effectively in the political revamping of the country. It's a disgrace, actually. And that's why when people call themselves political elites, people call themselves journalists of repute, people call themselves all sorts of names, and they go around with their padded shoulders, but we appear not to hear them speak truth to power and act it, we're still going to be stagnated. Now, at the height of the COVID, I'm referring to things of the past because there needs to be a tie back to issues that have actually brought us to this point where we're not able to negotiate our future as a continent effectively. The vestiges of the past are, first of all, disable the unity of the African continent, and that's why you find out that a country like Morocco, at some point in its history, has been applying to become part of Europe because Moroccans believe there are more Europeans than Africa, whereas the same Morocco, when President Muhammadu Buhari was there, wanted to be part of the economic community of West African states. So you see the confusion in identity, that's number one. Number two, Africa has not evolved a system that enables it to trade with itself because, as I speak, it is even less than 50% the kind of trade that Africa does amongst one another, whereas all the resources available in the world to make a continent fully functional is here in the African continent. And let me tell you the ridiculous part. At the 39th summit of the African Union, we had all forms of country from Europe that participated in the African Union 39th summit. I was shocked to my marrows. How could you have Europeans at an African Union meeting? Doing what? Have you ever heard that when the European Union is meeting, we have African countries and presidents there? No, they could invite you to Europe or Asia, but that meeting is exclusively theirs. It tells you that there's a disaster in political leadership in many parts of Africa that has even thrown away the ability to reason by the leaders of this our continent. And that's why I need to say this, that for everybody who has had the privilege of education, excuse me, we have to be determined that we are on a journey to take back this continent from those who appear to be educated, but they lack the onus to represent us. And we have to understand that getting into that position requires immense sacrifices and dedication, and even in some cases, the loss of our own lives. Because for you to change the status quo, you have to be ready to lay down your life, or else nothing good will ever happen. And let me say this. When I started this conversation, I talked about gravitating towards the source. The current president of Botswana epitomized that when he was invited recently to the White House. He said he has not responded, and he said, for us as Botswana, we have the gold, and for anybody to invite us, if you need us, you come to us. Nigeria has mineral resources in unquantifiable amounts. We still go out to meet these people, whereas they need what we are. So I think that it's a whole 360 degrees examination of our brains, examination of the things we do, and to call African leaders to order. Many people are desperate, and they are still attending the AU meetings, and nobody is telling them and looking at their face and saying, you should organize elections in your country and stop sitting and changing the election.
Mr. Kunnu, Mr. Kunnu.
Oh my goodness.
So Mr. Kunnu,
yes, please. Yes.
With everything that's happening now, and I like that you have laid everything down very, very strategically, does America-Nigeria relationship seem suspicious? I ask that because, well, we all know, and Magonga, you could actually even chime in here. He said, you are a drug dealer, I'm coming to get you. And he captured the Venezuelan president. He said, you have nuclear weapons, I'm coming to get you. And he invaded Iran, even inside of negotiations. He said, you are a Christian genocide country. We're still trapped in that loop. We haven't seen where that's going. So is it a suspicious relationship, noting the oil disruptions that's going on in the entire world right now, and that Nigeria is a strategic country inside of Africa as an oil-producing nation? Mr. Kunnu, let's let Magonga go first, and then you could come back to answer that.
That is a foregone conclusion. We know, I mean, with what has happened in the Gaza, we've seen how the Americans and the Israelis are treating Iran. That basically has, and even the war in Ukraine, in Russia and Ukraine, and the European Union, the European Community, sorry, it is hypocrisy of the highest order. Even the ICC itself. Look, I specialize in intellectual property, and most of these things to do with it. Okay, let me put it this way. A brother of mine who lives in the US is a promoter. He promotes his son now. His son is a musician. So after Lion King, they went and patented Hakuna Matata. Hakuna Matata is a Kenyan word that means there's no problem. Hakuna Matata. Hollywood patented that word Hakuna Matata in Lion King. And you cannot patent a language. How can you patent a language Hakuna Matata? So like now we want to do a show for my nephew who's in the US. When it comes to Kenya, we have to do something Hakuna Matata hot fire, something like that. Because they patented that. They started intellectual property and all the rules and regulations governing intellectual property is them who have set it up. So it is not, those rules, we have not been called on board for us to be stakeholders in this entire thing. The same thing, like I said earlier, about how the prices of petroleum are dictated, even the price of gold. How can the person who sets the price of gold set it up every morning in London, the UK? Zemu says how much the worldwide price is supposed to be. The hypocrisy that is there. We have to decide once and for all to make a significant step to break away from the West. There's nothing significant that they're giving us. Our property, our possessions from Africa is what has built the Western world. Look at what Ibrahim Traore did to France. A cake of uranium was going for $5. I think I'm not very sure about the figure, but during when the French were in Burkina Faso, a cake of uranium was going for about $5. After they were thrown out, they discovered the international price for a cake of uranium is $553. You can imagine the disparity in price. People like right now about cocoa, they don't want us to add value. They want to take our stuff. Look, you look at every American movie, people are talking about coffee. I've not slept. I need coffee. Coffee, I can't. Coffee. You think they grow coffee? They don't grow coffee. Coffee comes from Kenya, Brazil, Ethiopia. Look at chocolate and ice cream. Who's talking about the best people who make those things? The Italians. Why can't we give them a finished product instead of selling them our cocoa seeds? It's a very emotive thing. I get very, very upset about this whole shit.
All right, then, Magonga, we're almost out of time. We really want Mr. Kunnu's submission here on that question. Mr. Kunnu, real quick, please.
Yes, I only wanted to tell you that there's no country that can dwell in isolation. I think the levers of power and control and the proper utilization of the entire value chain of what belongs to Africa must be exploited advantageously. Even if we decide to take all of our resources and begin to exploit it ourselves, we'll still need buyers. So the relationship between Nigeria and the US is not suspicious to me, and it simply means that the US has seen the loophole and the hypocrisy in the leadership of the country, and that's the reason it has actually coming from the angle it has come in, not necessarily talking about this. For instance, if a country is not decimating non-state actors by itself, a country is not taking advantage and arresting people who should be arrested that are supporting insurgency, you have created a crack in your wall, and that is what perhaps global leaders need to actually say, okay, we're going to take advantage of this and use it against them. For instance, why is it that some of the things that they have brought to our doorstep, they're not taking it to a country like Morocco, they're not taking it to a country like Egypt? It is simply because we have allowed the crack in our walls. Why are they not taking it to a country like Singapore? So I'm simply saying here that whilst we are part of those who believe in Pan-Africanism and that it is possible for Africa to control the levels of power, we also believe that symbiotic relationship where we take advantage and we take the lead with respect to our human and natural resources can be possible. We cannot live independently of others. We need collaboration. We need symbiotic relationship. We need a healthier and more collaborative Africa. And we need to start negotiating as a continent rather than as countries, because that is where the cracks allow a lot of weakening of the strength of the continent. That's how I want to respond to that, please.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I wish we had more time to dissect this because it's a heavy topic. The project called Africa, I think, is everyone's responsibility and right. And it's quite clear that in an interconnected world, distant wars are rarely distant for very long.